Well, I think this is going to be a question that everyone's going to be thinking about individually within their organisations or their local authorities already. Obviously, we would recommend following your local guidance on what PPE and also what you have available. But at a very minimum, having gloves, some kind of antibacterial hand wash or appropriate hand wash, just so that you can deal with that. Wet wipes, of course, are always useful, but they don't have any kind of cleansing in terms of killing through alcohol properties. But we know that a number of organisations who have restarted detached work are also having discussions about using masks. And I know the MYA and UK Youth are also thinking about this. There's probably a range of different opinions on this, either that people feel that that creates a barrier between the young people that they may be working with, or that there still isn't enough medical evidence to prove either way how you feel about using a mask. But what we would say is wear and use whatever you have appropriately and whatever makes staff feel safe to be able to work with young people. So we aren't encouraging anyone to do anything without feeling that they're going to be safe in that situation. And as we all know, local authorities who are predominantly in charge of giving out the PPE equipment to youth workers are struggling with getting it for all of their key workers. So we are aware that is an issue at the moment.
If I can just add to that, this afternoon I've got a call with a tech company who is setting up a new charity platform to connect businesses with charities to bring together the things that they need. So it might be that some of that more low-level PPE that isn't being distributed directly to the health service, we might be able to connect some of you to those kind of organisations through a platform like that to help you get some additional resources. So as soon as we've got some more information on that, I'll post that on the Youth Work Support website so people can tap into that. Thanks, Emily. Okay, the next question that we had was quite an interesting and topical one. So somebody said that they were worried about how they were supposed to build those detached relationships with young people during this time without being perceived to be encouraging young people to be outside and encouraging groups and encouraging meetups. And interestingly, we've had a couple of stories today actually with local authorities where detached youth workers have been told that they're not allowed to go and work with young people, because if they are, then they're actually contravening the guidance, because obviously currently, although we're working on it, youth workers aren't identified as key workers. So Emily, any advice that you've got around that, please?
Yes. Well, again, it sort of relates back to the local information. Some local authorities that we're aware of are saying that they are allowing detached workers to go out. Others aren't. We are talking about physical distancing rather than social distancing, so people can understand exactly what that means. Physical distancing is about the space between the people that you're working with, and social distancing is the word that the government is using about how we should try to keep away from each other to protect in this situation. Can you just mention about the building relationships? Can you just repeat that bit, Abby?
Yeah, I think what the person that sent the question was worried about was how is it going to be possible to build and sustain those relationships given that guidance that's being sent from local authorities about not congregating groups?
It is going to be hard. No one is doubting that it's going to be hard, and there are going to be a lot of young people who aren't able to use the digital platforms that are being set up to support them. The detached teams that we're aware of, that we're in communication with, are doing phone contact with young people if they are able, and if they have those contact details. It's never going to be easy to lose those relationships and have that pause in that relationship with young people, and I'm sure people with equal or more experience with will have their opinions of how to do that as well. But if there is any ways to try and keep those relationships without using the methods that you normally use, then we should continue to do that. I know that most social services around my area and where I work are using WhatsApp video calls, or some schools are going to houses if they know where young people live and standing a considerable distance away to fit within the physical distancing, and then having a conversation with those young people, or being able to at least see that they're well and keep up those relationships. It is difficult if you don't have good relationships with your local police, which I think also leads on from this question, because those will be the other colleagues who'll be able to support you in still being able to go out and do that work with young people if you are able. So we definitely encourage, and we would do that anyway as part of our guidance, that you work with the local COVID mutuals, and that you get in contact with the local police teams to recognise and acknowledge that you're going to be out there supporting young people. We wouldn't encourage people to be acting as police. We would never do that anyway, even in normal time. But we would still be saying that detached workers should be encouraging young people to follow the rules that the government has in place for going home if they are able.
And I would just add to that as well, that there are some really, really good examples of detached projects that are still working and still operating in a really positive way with some of those agencies that Emily said. I see Tarek, you've just commented in the chat to talk about how you change the focus of your relationships, and the key stuff there is working closely with the services that are operating in that area so they know who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working with my local COVID mutual. They've been set up in lots of areas by different organisations. Also, faith groups are doing lots of work at the moment, so linking up with them, and food banks and other areas like that. Every community is going to be different, but in my area, it's faith groups, the local COVID mutual groups, and things like health watches, which are quite often run through community organisations as well.
Thanks, Emily. Just to let everybody know, Graham has managed to get into the room, so he's here somewhere too. Graham, could you unmute yourself and just introduce yourself to the group, if that's okay?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Graham Tiffany. I'm the Vice Chair, UK Federation for Detached Youth Work. I'm also on the expert group for the international network of social street workers, of which detached youth workers are a significant part. So that's 50 odd countries around the world. And at some point in the next hour, I'll draw your attention to some of the guidance we've written for your colleagues in all continents. I work now on an independent basis, having worked as a detached youth worker for a long time, but I'm still very, very interested in and supportive of detached youth work. And I recognise a lot of the names here, and I've been involved in a lot of training for detached youth work for a long time. But I've done quite a lot of work on the implications of COVID-19 for our practice now. But I will say also, I think it's important that today we spend at least a few minutes thinking about the implications for our practice in the future. This is going to be an important opportunity to learn really important things about detached youth work, and I think we need to do as much thinking as we can in order to prepare for what happens afterwards. I don't want the things to be connected. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, so the last question that we had prior to the meeting, if I can pose that to you, Emily, and to you, Graham. The guidance that's been issued related to detached youth work suggests that in these circumstances, detached youth workers should act a little bit more like social workers. If that is the case, do you think we really can call it detached youth work? And that was the question. Should we go with you first, Emily, and then Graham?
Oh, I think Graham will want to go first on this one.
Yeah, I was conscious actually that in the micro course, it identified young people as detached from services. And of all the material in the micro course in the NYA, it was the only thing I would sort of find any fault over. And we've long since said in the Federation that in order for detached youth work to be understood as in a detached concept, it's the workers who are detached. And in that sense, they are detached from institutional life elsewhere, and especially formal institutional life. So that is where there is some tensions in the more bureaucratic and legal kind of realities of what it is to do social work. I made a reference a moment ago to colleagues in other countries, where of course in almost all of them social work is understood as a non-formal form of community work. So it's peculiarly unusual is social work in a UK context because of its legal and child protection context. But I think for me the value at the moment, I've been out with detached youth workers in Leeds recently, and it's that sense of being a community worker more than anything, and being present in places where you know, we can have conversations with people who are really struggling to access us through these new online platforms and stuff like that. So I don't want to lose a lot of sleep about that, but it is important that we don't go out and stand on a corner talking to a load of people for an hour, because part of our safety and security at this time is it relates to our professional status. And if we get identified by people as an attraction, as a kind of a mechanism for encouraging the congregation of people, then that's not going to do our status any good at all. So my advice, and the advice in the guidance document that we've put together, is certainly go out, but spend a modest amount of time, yeah? And in that sense, you have to use that more limited time in a really quite structured way. You've got to do your checking on the young people that you're in contact with, and I would argue with their families. There's a family context, a community context to our work at the moment. So your questions need to be much more direct and less, if you like, sort of chat orientated. We need to make sure that people are happy, safe, secure, or whatever, and point them in the direction of the other things that colleagues and perhaps yourselves are doing online and elsewhere on the internet or whatever. So that's the reasons why the guidance says have foremost in your mind this sense that we've got a very limited amount of time to talk to people during detached youth work in this context, and therefore we might need to actually ask some quite direct questions about people's health and welfare.
Yeah, following on from that, I think I would pick up on two things. One is to say from my personal context and particularly from a London setting, is that quite a lot of detached teams, if they do still exist in the form that we understand them, or detached workers working as part of a wider team, fit within an early help offer normally. And so it is likely that there will be some crossover to social work practice, even in normal day-to-day work that detached workers may be doing, either by getting referrals from different parts of local authorities, even if they're in the voluntary sector, this can still happen, or through knowing young people through criminal justice or YOS routes as well. So I don't think it is a huge step that's just because of COVID. I think it might be that local authorities, particularly if you work in a local authority setting, will be trying to spread their experienced workers across their more high-risk families at the moment. So I think that's probably a crossover. But I would go along with what Dom's saying, and I know people are writing in the chat area, which is really helpful, thank you, is that actually it's not important at the moment, but it is important after this, as Graham mentioned before, to recognise that the method we are using is a detached method, even if it's delivering during this period, that should be recognised in the future, that there's experience and need for that in outside of this COVID bubble that we're in at the moment. And the other thing is to say about the community aspect of it, which I also agree with Graham on, is that detached workers have always had community reassurance and community activism as part of their role, and this is much more stronger now because we are seeing a much more varied group of people from the community out and about on the streets, or less depending on what your community is exactly. So I think we should really be acknowledging that you aren't always just talking to young people when you're out doing detached work, and those other messages about advocating for young people in this difficult time are just as important as working directly with the young people. And just to give one example, because someone mentioned it further up in the chat about some examples of talking to young people about how to work with physical distancing. I spoke to some colleagues from Hackney this week, and they said that they were going out for much shorter sessions, so 1 to 2 hours at a time, and they were also doing things like taking tape measures with them and doing things with young people about, oh, this is what 2 meters actually looks like, and kind of making that a trigger for their discussions with young people when they were meeting with them. So that's just a little hint that you can all start taking tape measures out with you as well.
Let me just follow on quickly. It seems to me that a more pertinent relationship for our discussions at the moment is that with the police. And you've probably been in your discussions before I arrived, I'd mentioned this essential need to discuss your status at a local level, and that will necessarily be with the police as well. So in that sense, we know that if we are identified as ordinary citizens, we could be the victims of police believing that we are, like anybody else, disregarding social distancing regulations and guidance. So you must be known to the police. Now, to be known to the police is probably something that exists for all of you. But what appears to be happening at the moment is that there is this kind of counter argument about we don't want to criminalise people who are out there. And one of the things we've been concerned about in the Fed, and especially in the international networks, is the danger of more authoritarian regimes criminalising people for being on the streets. And of course, I include within that those people who actually live on the street, who've got no homes to go to. So managing your relationship with the police at the moment seems to be absolutely crucial. And many police officers will not want to criminalise young people. I know of quite a few cases of young people being brought home already by police officers. And that's something that probably many of them don't want to do. So there is some tension here, because what is likely is that police officers will contact you and they'll say things like, we've noticed there's a lot of young people down here, down there, down, you know, in such and such a place. Can you go and have a look? Now, of course, as Emily alludes to previously, this is a long-term dilemma for detached youth workers. So my advice is to have really front foot forward conversations with policing in your area, and to kind of watch yourself a little bit with this kind of stuff. You know, out with detached youth workers in Leeds, if I was to give an example, one of the ways they've tried to deal with what is an obvious dilemma is to actually just say to young people, look, do you know the police have contacted us, to be as absolutely transparent as possible that this communication is going on. And so there's some kind of language forms where we might say to young people, well, look, they don't want to nick you, do you know what I mean? So they're giving us a little bit of a nudge to have a word with you, you know, because they don't want to be taking you home, they don't want to be issuing you in with warnings and whatever else. So in my judgment, the relationship with the police is really quite challenging at the moment, and needs to be handled sensitively. We know that with some young people, if we get too close to the police, we're going to damage our relationships with those young people. So I worry a bit more about that relationship than I do with social work colleagues at the moment. I'm sure there's much more to say about this point.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on a few things because I've just been reading the chat while Graham's been speaking about the police thing. every area is going to have different relationships with the police. Some are going to have really good ones, some are going to struggle, some have had good ones, and then I've heard examples of where the police have done, I think, what the same as what someone from Stuart from East Surrey has said, that then they've pulled out and said, no, we definitely don't want you on that. I know the Abby will speak from the MYA's perspective, but the MYA and UK Youth and the Mix are working with the government to try and advocate for youth workers and detached youth workers to become registered as key workers. Mostly at the moment that is happening at a local level, so local authorities are making decisions about that. So mine and a number of others that I'm aware of have all agreed through discussion at a very senior level that it's okay for that to happen. And then if you do and don't have those good relationships with the police, you can work from, you know, across from that as well. So it is a lot about those relationships. I would say that at the moment the police are also, just to advocate for them a little bit, is that they are also under extreme pressure to behave a certain way, and so they are going to be reacting differently, as we've seen on Twitter with some senior police officers saying you shouldn't be buying alcohol, that counts as something that's not an essential, and then others, and then that getting reversed through government decisions. So it's not just that all different areas are reacting differently, but all different areas of the police are also having to react to that. So that's not to say that I completely agree with some of the ways that they are behaving, but we should be aware that everyone is having to work out what this situation means for them at the moment, and that's also going to have an impact on the number of staff that are or aren't in their service at that time. But normally I would say that local police teams, rather than responsive police teams, are the better ones to have those relationships with, because they're also out in the communities more regularly. So we'll start to understand some of the sort of issues that are going on. And it's really good to see from the chat that lots of people actually do have good relationships with the police. That's really positive as well.
Let me just pick up for 1 second. A statement will be on the Federation website by the end of today, which is an international statement about this issue of securing essential status. And I know, and it's been repeated by Emily, that this work is going on with the MYA and government, but colleagues across the world recognise the value of securing some kind of essential status in their relationships with others. So do look for that. It's just a short 2-page document. It's been written with colleagues from all continents, and it may well be useful as a bit of a political tool for securing that status locally.
And just to add to that, and to reiterate the point that Emily made, we're in conversations with DCMS daily and with the Home Office about key worker status for young people. But I think almost more interestingly is some of the work that we're doing with the Police and Crime Commissioner with responsibility for young people. It's very clear that at a national level, the police recognise the significance, importance and value that detached youth workers bring at a local level. And as if you read through the chat, there's lots of people that are saying, we've got a really good relationship with our local police, we've got key worker status in our local community. And so just to reiterate the point that Emily made, really, we will continue to do that work at national level to get those things legislated for, but almost more important is what you're doing at a local level and how you negotiate those localised relationships, because they're your communities and they're your localities. Okay. Thank you. There's lots of things happening in the chat, but I also think, given that we're halfway through already, it's probably a really good time to open it up for people to raise any questions that they might have for Emily and Graham. So if you have got a question that you want to raise, either you're more than welcome to put it in the chat or raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and have a go, and we'll see how things work out.
One from Chelsea, it seems.
Yeah, I think that might have been, is that the question I put in through Twitter?
No, okay. Just say it again, it's
yeah,
fine.
yeah, I will. So basically, so just to introduce myself, I'm Chelsea Renahan. I manage the Participation Engagement Service for the London Borough of Merton. And we are doing, I'm quite proud of the service we've set up. Someone mentioned about responsive work. It is using the term responsive. I think it is responsive, it needs to be. So in terms of the detached elements, we're quite confident in our offer, and what we're now starting to talk about while we're out on detached with each other is how are we using this opportunity now to start the conversations about recovery. So when we come out of this, there's a real opportunity to revitalise the profession and the approach of detached youth work, and how are we taking that opportunity now while things are a bit more still in the background to look at our recovery plan and look at our advocacy plan to approach local authorities, voluntary sector funders to demonstrate exactly what the purpose and to celebrate the purpose of detached youth work is.
Yeah, I can have a go at that. I think what I would say immediately, Chelsea, is that I kind of have in my mind a kind of a linearity here. And what I mean by that is the reality that we are presently in, and then in this period of time that you call a recovery phase, the very great need for a kind of transitionary process. And I've been lobbying quite strongly, certainly where in the areas I know well, that young people, especially younger ones, they're going to need a period of time to transition back into schooling life. We know at this moment in time, schools are not actually, in that sense, teaching formally. So we've got colleagues in the youth services who are present in schools because they're different, it's more informal context. But transitioning back to the experience of formal education is going to be really quite difficult. So we need to be mindful of a journey towards the future. But I think part of your statement also relates, as I mentioned myself, to how do we consolidate what we've learned from this, and indeed from the status that we will inevitably gain by virtue of being able to work in spaces that nobody else is actually working in. One of the things I wrote in the guidance was this sense that, you know, we know where people are, yeah, and that sort of geographical point will be something that I think we need to talk about much more in the future. So again, you know, rather than me reiterating all the detail of this, I encourage you to read the documents that have been written for the international community, because we are very mindful around the world, especially in countries with repressive regimes, that we have to learn about the fact that we've been able to create resources. I think about, for example, homeless people who've been given accommodation in hotels or whatever. Yeah, it proves unequivocally that with will, these things can be done. And from my point of view, we should never let anybody ever forget that we were able to meet the needs of people at this time. So we need to be arguing that we're capable of doing this in the future. Of course, my greatest fear is that we're going to go back into a different age of austerity to recoup the economic contributions that have been made to dealing with this time. And in parallel to that, we know that there's a possibility that some of the kind of security regimes that have been put in place, of course, in order to protect us biologically and physiologically, could well exist for an awful long time. The legislation that we've got at the moment is on the statute books for a minimum of 2 years. And we need to be really kind of mindful and watchful about how that stuff impacts on young people going forward, about their rights to move in public space thereafter, and so on and so on and so on. So I would sort of end my point here in saying that I do not see these things as indivisible. These are parallel conversations that we need to continue with now in this transitionary period and into the future. So, you know, the sense that we've got quite a lot of political work to do to consolidate, you know, what we've done and what we learned, it will become vital, not just now, but going forward.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, I just comment on a couple of things, but I just want to mention, because the chat's going quite quickly, which I really appreciate, and our colleague Steve is also not speaking audibly, but is putting lots of chat for you in the message group as well. So thank you for him to doing that. But I just want to mention that after I've commented on, Chelsea, your question, I want to come back to a question that Armand has put on, because it's just about to disappear off the chat screen as I can see it. But Chelsea, yeah, I would concur with Graham and just say we already know that transitions are difficult for young people sometimes to get their head around, particularly those which are also linked to significant ages or school changes. And I think we all know how exhausted young people are in September when they go back after having had a summer holiday. This is like the most ridiculously long summer holiday that particularly primary school children will have ever experienced. And coming back as adults into whatever the real world is going to look like after this is probably going to be quite a psychological shock. We shouldn't minimize that young people and adolescents and teenagers who also quite often can have experiences of poor mental health during these periods will get that as well. And I think the mental health stuff is something that lots of organizations are picking up for young people, that they're unable to you know, support young people through those kind of issues. But transitions in general are going to be significant for young people, and I think that's going to be what everyone's going to be going through, which is in one way a positive because we'll all be experiencing it at the same time, but also is going to be difficult because we're not going to know what that's going to look like to be able to use evidence to support children and young people in the best way possible. So yeah, that's just to focus on that. And then just to go back to the comment that Armand meant, just to be really, really clear for everyone, that the Federation and all of us as individuals are not advocating that we encourage young people to come out and meet with detached workers. We're saying that if there are young people who are going outside of their own choices or because they're experiencing difficulties at home, so they need the streets to make them, to give them a break, then that's when detached workers will be there for them. We would never be advocating that we call up young people and say to them, come out and meet with workers out on the streets. At the moment we are absolutely following government guidelines, but we are saying that there are some young people who are really going to be struggling with this period. And there was actually an article yesterday which was very, very briefly on the BBC website about the guidance being updated, and that if you were having a conflict within a house where you're self-isolating, that it was eligible for you to go round to a friend's property or some other safe property for a period of time to be able to you know, diffuse that conflict situation. Sorry, Abby's putting her fingers up saying I think maybe 3 hours or up to 3 days.
3 days, up to 3 days, yeah.
Yeah, for up to 3 days. And I think that that's something that we do need to think about, you know, in the same context. It's not saying we would say to young people go and do that, but we just need to be aware that that is now guidance from the government as well. So but yeah, we would never be saying encourage young people to come out and meet with us at this time.
I think just to add on to that is it's really important for us to recognise there's a lot of recognition at government level about the new and emerging vulnerabilities that are happening as a result of COVID. So the point that Emily made about young people that are out might be because home is not a safe place. And it would be inappropriate for us to just go, oh, well, it's all right, everybody go digital. And because not all young people have access to that. There's the estimates suggest that 12% of young people don't have access to digital mechanisms. And so for those young people and for young people with increased vulnerability, detached work and those trusted relationships might be their only positive engagement with adults that can help provide that safe information about social distancing, etc. And currently we're working on the estimates that the vulnerability framework used to anticipate around 1 million young people a year would be considered vulnerable, and current statistics are saying that COVID has increased that threefold to approximately 3 million young people. So whilst detached work isn't about encouraging young people to come out or to congregate, what it is doing in those places where it's operating brilliantly is providing safe, secure, trusted relationships with adults that can then signpost young people who might not be safe to places, relationships and services that can support. Comes back to those original points about the relationships that you have with local hubs, local police and other services to be able to connect young people in.
Just a quick point about, I mean, it's my view that many of us will be working with young people who've got problems that they've probably had and their families for an awful long time already. Yeah, there's nothing new in many of the problems that that people are experiencing at the moment. Most of them are just amplified and exacerbated, and they won't go away when we get, you know, when lockdown disappears. And so that is really a kind of a crucial point, that there's a kind of a social justice angle to making as many people aware as possible that these issues, they're not new, they've been in existence for a long time. My second point is about, you know, the message to stay at home. Absolutely, I agree with that. But equally, what I'm saying to young people is you must go out and have your hour of exercise. Yeah, you know, I've met kids recently who are terrified to go out. Some of them, they're out all the time. Others are terrified to go out at all. Yeah, and we must convince them that it's very important for their health and welfare to go out, and they, of course, and to do so safely. But I want to see them taking the opportunity that currently exists, and that does not exist in other countries. For example, in France and Spain and Italy, in certain areas, they're not letting anybody out at all, and we don't want to get to that situation. So I've been encouraging young people, get yourself some exercise, get some fresh air, you know, and that's going to help you, you know, deal with the kind of confinement that you're going to have to put up with for the rest of the day.
And I just wanted to follow on slightly, just relevant to what Abby was saying. The other thing about what youth workers and detached workers who are going out at the moment can also do is make sure that young people are aware of other services that have gone digital or gone by phone instead, particularly around, this is something Abby and I were in a conversation about the other day, but around sexual health, mental health and other family conflicts or personal issues that might be coming up. Because one of the things that you will all see from the news is that contact with local health services has gone down for sort of normal issues, and we would really push for detached workers, when you are going out on the streets, to be making sure you know where services have changed their delivery models so that young people can still get access to them, and not to stop young people having access to what would be their normal offer around sexual health that they may normally get through schools or through other youth provision that may now be digital. So stuff around mental health, and a lot of counselling services are doing online now, or through webinars where you can chat directly with a counsellor rather than having to be so you still stay anonymous, or other services like that that are really important for young people to still have access to. So we would encourage, in terms of reconnaissance, a lot more research in your local areas about what services are now delivering in a slightly different way, because I do worry that young people will end up down the line with sexual health issues in particular that they wouldn't talk to their families about, that are then going to be left for a number of weeks or months without getting treatment or support around them. So yeah, those sorts of things are really important as well.
Yeah, we've seen, you know, evidence already. It's colleagues will tell you in social work that we think there's a doubling of domestic violence incidents. And all of us will know that domestic violence is a proxy for familial violence. And if there's domestic violence going on and it's increasing, we can pretty much assume that that other stuff is going on. I don't want to, you know, that is serious stuff. And our work traditionally has been on the kind of boundary of that rather than within that, which takes us back to the question about social work. but we do need to be watchful and mindful of that kind of stuff. And there was a specific note about kids who on the autistic spectrum. There's been a really strong and effective lobby to say that those kids in particular, they can go out when they need to go out 2 or 3 times a day if necessary. So I think part of our narratives is stay home, but get out and get some exercise, get some fresh air, because that's going to be good for you. Of course, don't go out and congregate, go out and get some movement done, go for a walk, ride your bike or whatever. And if you do that safely, you shouldn't be fearful.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? We've got just over 10 minutes left, so let's make the most of having the experts in the room while we can.
Hi, can you hear me? Sorry, thank you. I'm Tish Lamb. I'm Chief Exec of a small charity based in Hull, and we've been delivering detached work for over 30 years, predominantly around sexual health information for young people, but more recently about working with vulnerable young people. And coinciding with that, we also have a CSE project that's been running for 12 years. So we've got permission to do the key worker status, because they're all trained in detached youth work, to go out specifically around the areas of those young people who we are aware of are regularly going missing anyway, specifically from residential care homes, and just checking on that they're safe and well. And some of our other issues have been around young people who we support around CSE, who are now saying they're out in they are outside, which is great, but they are hanging around people that we're unsure of who they are. So it's about a reaction to that. So we've done a lot of work around it. Spoke to a lot of people, spoke to the NWG for CSE. And one of the things that came up was we'd want to talk to them also about encouraging them to stay safe. And if they are congregating, to not do that as much, certainly go home. And it sort of links in with something you were saying a few minutes ago in terms of what we do if a young person says, I can't go home, there's an increase in domestic abuse in my home, I don't want to be there, in terms of our role and the scenario around that, about what our next steps are. Because obviously we can't stay indefinitely with that young person, we physically can't take them anywhere. We can give them information about other services, but is there a way that we can ask some of the neighbourhood policing teams to come out and help support that young person as well, or even the domestic abuse partnership workers? We keep going backwards and forwards on the discussion around it, really.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, this is very much part of the kind of backroom work, if you like, at the moment. We should be having conversations with children's social care and other agencies with this eventuality in mind. And I can say that locally here, you know, there are arrangements in place should these situations occur. We've already had a discussion about what would happen. So I'd encourage everybody to get on the phone to Children's Social Care and say, look, you know, we continue to do detached youth work. We've got a concern, albeit unlikely, that we might come across kids. You know, what's the protocols here? Where, you know, how are we going to deal with it? Yeah. And Emily said in relation to working with the police, that will be different in different places. In some areas that's well established already. In others, you might need to take the lead in terms of, you know, arguing for some kind of system to be put in place. And there may be others here today who are on the, you know, who've established clear lines of activity in relation to this question. I don't know.
I mean, just from my point of view, I would say if you're coming upon something which, because of the current situation, feels like it's a safeguarding issue, then you're going to have to follow the local safeguarding procedures that relate to that. And obviously you already know that. But I think some things are going to be what we may have deemed as to be able to be supported by non-statutory services are going to end up being a safeguarding issue that needs to be dealt with sooner because of the situation that we're in. So yeah, I would say I can understand where you're feeling, because maybe you would normally not feel that it was as extreme a situation that you would want to report it, but because of the current situation, I think it probably would still mean that. I know that in our area and across London, early help and safeguarding referrals have gone down, but there is a lot more but that does vary depending on where you are, and also the different issues that are being raised through that. If it's a young person who's already vulnerable because they're a care leaver, then I would say the expectation is that that young person should get additional support back through social care because of that situation. So yeah, I mean, I'd advocate for you being able to support that process and go back to them. Police services are going to be very, very stretched at the moment, so it's going to be hard to do it in the way that you normally would have. So I can feel where your tension is with that, but I think that it does mean that social services would need to become involved again, even the care leaving service, for those young people because of their other vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick response. My judgment, again, I keep saying that, but my judgment is that it's those who are already in the purview of children's social care that are most likely to be negatively affected by what they will already be in some kind of context. That generally is not our focus, it seems to me. There may be young people that you're working with who are on, various registers or whatever. That's fair enough. So you will probably know quite a lot about them. It's the ones who are on the boundaries or whatever. So I think that's kind of what's in that question. And that's why I said, this kind of heightened awareness about what's going on and asking these perhaps quite direct questions about, how is it, how is it at home and whatever else, rather than getting into some kind of conversational world. We have to use the limited time that we've got to do that. And I just wanted to make a bit of a point about when we actually do meet young people on the street. And it seems to me that here our relationships with them is key. And some of them we know well and they trust us and whatever else. We can probably be quite direct with them and say, look, you probably need to be at home. For others, you might need a bit more of a subtle response. Young people that you're trying to work with, but perhaps struggling to work with, where just an open-ended question like, are you staying safe or whatever, might be a way into a short conversation. I mean, recently I was out and I met a group of like 10 young, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. They are not in the same household, do you know what I mean? And you probably need a set of linguistic interventions that are a bit different from just saying go home, in that. So you've got to use your skills, and all of you will have skills in making these kinds of judgments. What kind of statement, or more pertinently for some, what kind of question might get them just thinking about what's going on at the moment.
Can I just say something?
Go on, Dom.
Thank you, Graham. Let's get a word in. You well?
Why?
No, just really looking to post-lockdown, and I alluded to some funding available in on the chat section there. National Lottery, through their Awards for All, are dishing out grants of up to 10k. And it really is one of the simplest applications. It took me 20 minutes to fill in, and you're almost guaranteed, as long as you got all the robust procedures and policies in place to get some money. And I think it'll be a real good opportunity, like Graham said, to fund some trips out, get kids out of the country and do whatever, get a little bit of exercise. But there's a whole heap of other funding becoming available. So I'd urge you all to look at the thing called Funding Insight. Check out Funding Insight and check out with the NYA, because there's suddenly lots of pots of money coming forward. So let's take advantage of that. Anybody needs any help, I'll put my email address on the chat thing, I'd be more than happy to direct them into terms of where funding is available. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Don,
Sorry.
can you put the notes in the chat room about the things that you're referencing, Don?
He has already, Graham. We'll make sure we share them. Thanks, Don. Emily?
And just in relation to what Don said about funding, you can, if you're London based or in the southeast, then you can also go to Partnership for Young London, who've got some information that I actually got their mailing list today, but they also have it on their website, that there's funding relevant for London organisations to be able to search and get little pots similar to what Don was just talking about as well. Just saw that there was a question in the comments box about bereavement support, and I know we're just coming to the end, Abby, so I'm just going to answer that one. Chelsea, I know you haven't sort of said it as a specific question, but Graham and I did talk this week briefly about stuff around bereavement, and it's something that I think in the UK we're quite poor at dealing with. This is my general opinion. It's not related to the feds, but the federations, but it does link to the situation that we're going through at the moment. And there are popping up, there have been in general before this, but also popping up grief cafes, or sometimes they're called different bereavement cafes and things like that, where people can go and talk about death and how it's affecting them. There's quite a few of those that are online at the moment. I haven't seen any related to young people, and I think it is something that as detached workers may come up because of the impact this is having on what young people are seeing in the news and on social media, and also the impact on people dying in general, not just from COVID-19, and what that experience is going to be like, different from what we normally understand the process of bereavement and death in general, through being able to go to funerals or be with your family at those sorts of times. So I don't have a straight answer for you, Chelsea, and there's lots of things online about it, and it may be something that the MYA that we can pick up through a conversation next week, Abby, because I think it's a good one and it hasn't been mentioned yet.
I think that's my point, is that so we have had a young person who's passed away. And we are in the process of, and two of our new formed detached workers, or two youth workers who worked with that young person, how we're going to support them, the young people in the community, and then also the young people within the family. And I think we're, like I said, I'm quite proud of how we're responding in terms of our youth work offer in Merton, but it's in terms of the profession and the network, it's certainly an early discussion that we should be having now as a wider network, and getting some guidance out, because it has been a web of emotions as well as complex thinking around how we're going to respond.
And sorry, just to come back to you on that, Chelsea, I do know a local organisation, because you're in Merton, that I can actually link you to, who have specialism around bereavement counselling for young people, and it's a free phone service, so I can tell you that separately, but it only will relate to you because you're in the neighbouring borough to Croydon, which is why I know that.
I think we're already.
Okay, great. But the other thing that I would say to people in general is that youth counselling services don't often advertise that bereavement counselling is also part of what they will support with, because generally it's not considered that young people will have that kind of bereavement need or experience, and it's just part of life, which is what will often be said to children, I think. So I would make sure that you know whatever your local mental health services are, and particularly counselling services, because like I said, they're doing a lot more stuff online and you can be anonymous in those questions. So there are places that are doing a lot more around that support for young people.
Can I just talk about it in a sense, the other side of life? And there's lots of stuff going on across the country that's really quite fun, you know, encouraging young people to do their exercise online or whatever. Here in Leeds is the plan to get some performers who will walk down the street, and you know, we've got sort of areas in some of the council estates where there's little greens, and they're going to do a little performance and then move on, almost in the kind of history of the mystery plays in York, where each act of the play was on a cart that went down the road. So, you know, there's an opportunity here to be really kind of creative. And in terms of like Chelsea's story, and I'm sure Abby would say this, we've got a kind of responsibility now to collect these stories and to share them with the community. And I know that the MYA are trying to do that, so I would encourage you all to do that. A final point from me is that we can meet again to discuss other issues that might come up. There's quite a lot of us in the Fed, and we could perhaps have a series of breakout rooms for different issues. So we've got much more chance for conversation. So have a think about that as well.
Thank you. We have come to the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for all of your questions, all of your comments in the Zoom box. I'm only sorry that we only had an hour, because I think we most definitely could have continued. We will work with Graham and Emily to hopefully be able to offer some further webinars, as Graham said, maybe some thematic ones that tie into specific areas that people want to really target might be useful. If you've got any key themes that you'd really like to address, either pop them in the group chat before you leave, and we can use that then to form the plans moving forward, or just ping us an email either to the Fed or to us at the MYA, or through any of our social platforms, and we'll gather that together. So once again, thanks everybody, and massive thanks to Emily and Graham for giving up their Friday afternoons to do this. Really appreciate it, and take care, keep safe.
Thank you everyone, bye.
Bye, bye, bye.